A thunderous explosion splits the waters of the East China Sea. Unryū, Japan's last fleet carrier, shudders as her bow disintegrates in a chain reaction of detonating suicide bombs. The ship rolls onto her side, her flight deck awash with December waves, before disappearing into the depths on what was meant to be her first combat mission. How did Japan's final carrier meet her end before ever launching a single strike? By late 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy existed as a shadow of the force that struck Pearl Harbor 3 years earlier. The catastrophic defeats at Midway, the Philippine Sea, and Leyte Gulf had reduced Japan's carrier strength to almost nothing. And it's out of this desperation that Japan came up with the Unryū class. This class, in which Unryū was part of, was designed for rapid construction and was Japan's final gamble to rebuild its shattered naval strength. Unryū, whose name means cloud dragon in Japanese, was ordered in 1941 as an updated version of the earlier Hiryu-type carrier. With a length of 745 feet 11 inches, Unryū displaced 20,450 tons when fully loaded. Her powerful steam turbines generated 152,000 shaft horsepower, making her reach a top speed of 34 knots. Unlike earlier carriers, Unryū didn't have heavy armour. This was aimed at hastening the construction due to the urgency involved, and also making her fast enough to keep pace with the battle fleet. In addition to her pace, the Cloud Dragon had incredible anti-aircraft defences. She had 6 twin 6-inch dual-purpose guns, over 70 barrels of 25mm automatic cannons on her deck, and 6 4.7-inch rocket launchers. Being a carrier, Unryū's aviation facilities could accommodate 65 aircraft and a few reconnaissance planes. However, Japan had serious pilot and aircraft shortages, making Unryū never reach her full capacity in her few years of service. Actually, she was also never involved in aerial combat despite her massive defences. Unlike the armoured Taiho, the Unryū class lacked extensive torpedo protection, leaving the ships vulnerable to underwater damage. This compromise ended up being fatal for the Japanese Navy. The initial plan was to build 16 Unryū-class carriers, but reality proved far different. Japan's industry was strained, and priorities were changing. As a result, only Unryū, Amagi, and Katsuragi were completed before the war ended. Unryū was commissioned on August 6, 1944. By this time, Japan had already effectively lost the war and was operating under numerous constraints. Training cruises were confined to Tokyo Bay and the sheltered Seto Inland Sea, far from American eyes, but also far from any operational purpose. Severe fuel shortages restricted her movements to short trips between anchorages. Vice Admiral Ozawa briefly used Unryū as his flagship after the mobile fleet was decimated at Leyte Gulf. However, the honour lasted for only 8 days before the mobile fleet was disbanded due to lack of enough carriers. Unryū remained anchored in the inland sea throughout the autumn of 1944. All she was involved in were drills and crew training, but within the safe waters. That would change in December, when she was assigned her first and only mission. On December 13, 1944, the Japanese Navy got news of American invasion fleets being sighted in the Sulu Sea. This sent them into a frenzy of desperate preparation, since they knew Luzon would be invaded. They planned a mission to send emergency reinforcements to Luzon to counter the American invasion. On December 17, 1944, Unryū departed Kure Naval Base. Her flight deck and hangars that were designed for strike aircraft now carried crated planes, spare parts, ammunition, aviation fuel, torpedo warheads, and hundreds of personnel. She also carried Japan's secret weapon, 30 Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, rocket-powered suicide planes designed for kamikaze attacks, destined for Manila. Rather than serving as a strike platform, launching aircraft in combat, Unryū was being used as a fast transport. She was escorted by destroyers Shigur, Hinoki, and Momi, with Captain Kaname Konishi commanding the fleet from Unryū's bridge. The ship's crew was inexperienced in battle, but in these desperate times, such desperate measures had to be taken. They experienced both dread and determination as they understood the risks involved in this mission. American submarines had made the once safe Japanese waters their deadly hunting grounds. Actually, Shinano was sunk a few weeks earlier by a US submarine. On December 19, 1944, USS Redfish was prowling off the China coast under Commander Louis McGregor, who had intelligence of the approaching Japanese fleet. At 4:30, McGregor spotted the Japanese formation and took positions ready for attack, and even to their advantage, Unryū's sonar never detected it. At 4:35 p.m, USS Redfish fired 4 torpedoes towards Unryū. Captain Konishi threw Unryū into a desperate starboard turn in an evasive maneuver. The ship swung away from danger with gratifying speed that made 3 torpedoes pass ahead of her. But the 4th hit near her bow with a thunderous crash that shook the entire ship. The torpedo detonated directly under the bridge, flooding the control center, forward boiler rooms and generator spaces. Unryū's steam pressure dropped to 0 as the main steam line shattered and her electric power died. She came to a sickening halt, listing 3 degrees to starboard. However, Unryū didn't sink, as her crew responded quickly by drawing firewalls to contain the fires and switching to auxiliary power. They also carried out counter-flooding measures to keep Unryū afloat as they attempted to restore steam pressure. After more than 10 minutes of desperation, the steam pressure rose as auxiliary boilers came online, and Unryū began moving forward again. But USS Redfish struck again after around 15 minutes, firing towards the middle of the ship's starboard side. The torpedo hit her forward aircraft elevator, adjacent to the aviation gasoline storage tanks. The explosion ignited volatile fuel in a massive fireball that erupted from the elevator well. The blast triggered a catastrophic chain reaction among the Oka suicide planes stored on the lower hangar deck. These experimental weapons, designed to destroy American ships, now turned their fury on their own carrier. The explosions literally blew Unryū's bow apart. Captain Konishi and his officers watched in shock as a tremendous volcano seemed to erupt forward of the bridge. The deck tilted sharply as the ship began listing starboard at 30 degrees. All flooding systems were overwhelmed as the sea rushed through enormous holes torn in the hull. This time, Unryū was doomed, and Captain Konishi knew it. He immediately gave the order to abandon ship. At 4:57 p.m, Unryū rolled 90 degrees onto her starboard side and plunged bow first. Men struggling in oil-slicked frigid waters saw her upended stern and port quarter guns as the last remnants of the Cloud Dragon slipped beneath the East China Sea. Of the approximately 1,400 on board, only 145 were rescued by some of the destroyers. Over 1,200 lives were lost, including Captain Konishi, his executive, navigation officers, and most of the ship's senior staff. The tragedy was kept relatively quiet to maintain morale, but it was one of the greatest single-ship losses for the Japanese Navy. Destroyer Shigure also sustained damage and had to return to port, while Hinoki and Momi continued with the mission, suffering the same fate as the Cloud Dragon. The supplies, weapons and Oka planes Unryū carried never reached Luzon's desperate defenders as they went down with her. Unryū's sister ship Amagi was heavily damaged by air raids before becoming operational, while Katsuragi never left Japanese harbours due to fuel shortages. That marked the end of the Japanese Navy's era of carrier fleets, where once legendary vessels like Akagi, Kaga and Zuikaku dominated the Pacific waters. The Imperial Japanese Navy was left with virtually no fleet carriers. The Cloud Dragon was gone, sunk before she had ever struck a blow.